I'll include what I like to call pearls of wisdom that have come to be foundational for me as I've moved through my challenges in my life. First one, what you resist will persist. And the second, the Serenity Prayer. I'm going to use some of my challenges to show how these pearls of wisdom fit in and show you some examples about acceptance and resistance and the results that each brought. Some difficult challenges began when Heather and Logan were born 3 years apart with exactly the same syndrome, with no explanations and no expectations. And then a new challenge came 7 years ago when Heather and Logan were both diagnosed with autism. You'll hear more about Heather and Logan when I finish my talk because they're going to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about themselves and some of the challenges that they have learned to accept and are still learning to accept. In my late 20s, I heard the saying, what you resist will persist for the first time. Now, I sort of knew what it meant, but it was more intellectually than experientially, so it wasn't until I actually experienced myself resisting my challenges, having them persist, or worse yet, create a new challenge, that I finally really understood the meaning. My resistance came in many packages: avoidance, anger, addiction, denial, procrastination, feeling overwhelmed, and of course, just ignoring the problems. When I was resisting challenges in these ways, at best, they stayed the same. But usually they got worse, and sometimes even created a whole nother challenge that I had to deal with. As with all of us, childhood brought challenges early. But it wasn't until 35 years ago that life's challenges really came to a head for me. I married Heather and Logan's father when I was 20 years old. There were no reasons to think that anything would be wrong with our children, because we had no family history of any problems. We were healthy and strong and both athletic. I was pregnant with Heather early in our marriage, and my pregnancy went along normally, so no clues there that anything would be wrong. I had morning sickness 24/7. I never really could figure out why they called it morning sickness. And I was a month late, a full month. That was a long month. When people would ask Terry, what do you want, a boy or a girl? He would say, I don't care as long as it has 10 fingers and 10 toes. And one time during my pregnancy, I thought, what if something's wrong with my baby? And I thought, look at all the normal people in the world. Think about all the normal babies born every day. Why would anything be wrong with your baby? And I actually never worried about it again. Well, I finally started contractions and was on my way to the hospital, and I remember thinking, I can't get out of this. I can't change my mind now. I have to go through this. And of course, I was really nervous about the pain and all that stuff and the unknowns. Well, we were in the delivery room watching the baby be delivered through a mirror that was posted up on the ceiling. And I could see a patch of dark hair. And I was so excited, I thought, yay, my baby has hair, it's not bald. And then the doctor pulled Heather out of my body and he said, you have a girl. And he placed her on my abdomen. And my eyes just locked on her arms. They were so bent. And I immediately went into denial. They're not bent. She's just been inside you for 10 months. They're scrunched up. They're going to straighten out as soon as she's been outside of you for a while. Kind of like a wrinkle in a fabric. But then Terry said, something's wrong with her arms. And I knew it was true. So I said to the doctor, is everything else okay besides her arms? And he said, well, Debbie, she only has 8 fingers and 8 toes. And that was just completely surreal. It just didn't seem like it was really happening at all. I was very separate from what was happening, like I was watching a movie. And the doctor just looked at me and he said, I'm so sorry, Debbie. This isn't the kind of baby I anticipated for you. Well, I was wheeled to recovery, and Terry went to call our parents to let him know what happened. And when he came back, I could not contain my emotions, and I was crying. And I said, I don't want this baby. And he said, I don't either. What are we going to do? And for those of you that are really uncomfortable right now, because Heather and Logan are sitting here right now hearing me say this, rest assured they understand automatic feelings, they understand denial, and they've experienced their entire life of unconditional love from me. And they've heard this talk a lot. We give it to the medical students. So they understand that. I'm sure they've had a few automatic knee-jerk feelings toward me sometimes that, they don't really mean. All right, well, I was wheeled to my room, and the pediatrician was waiting for me to tell me what he discovered in the physical. He told me some more about her bent arms, what he could. They hadn't x-rayed them or anything. And then he told me that the fingers that Heather had didn't straighten out at all, and most likely never would. And then he told me that she had a cleft palate. And then he explained what that was. She had a hole in the roof of her mouth, which meant she couldn't get any suction to breastfeed or to suck on a nipple. So they would have to feed her with a special feeder. So I asked him, if they know any more. And he said, well, she has small cup-shaped ears. And they're the same on both sides. Everything's symmetrical. And I said, well, can she hear? And he said, well, there's no reason to think she can't hear, but her ear canals are so tiny, we cannot actually look in and see ear canals or eardrums. So we're just going to have to wait and see. And he said something's wrong with her eyes, but we're not sure what it is because they're still very swollen from childbirth. And I said, well, can she see? And he said, we don't know. We're going to have to wait until her eyes adjust before we will know that. We'll just have to wait and see. And he had no answers as to why this happened. And after he'd answered all the questions that he could, he left. Later that night, after everyone had left, I was alone and exhausted. And I fell into a deep sleep, only to be awakened by a nightmare. And then I realized it's not a nightmare. It's really happening. And I cried myself back to sleep, only for it to happen again and again, over and over that night. In the morning, I called the front desk and I asked the nurses to stop all my phone calls because I just couldn't bear to hear the words, I'm so sorry. I wasn't ready to accept that all of this was really happening, so I couldn't deal with other people's reactions to the fact that this was indeed happening. I cried all that morning, and in the afternoon I started to get curious about the baby. So I walked down to the nursery, and I stood outside the nursery window. And there was only one baby in the nursery, and the nameplate said Heather Madsen. And I thought, that poor baby, she's in there all alone because all the other babies are with their mothers, and her mother doesn't want her, and I'm the mother. Tears were streaming down my cheeks, and I felt an arm go around my waist. And it was a nurse, and she said, would you like to go hold her? And said, okay. So I went in the back, and I sat in a rocking chair, and I waited. And 2 nurses brought Heather in. And they said, it's her feeding time. Would you like to watch us feed her? I said, okay. One of the nurses propped Heather up into a sitting position. And that's not easy for a newborn. You know how they can't hold their heads up or anything. They're flopping around. And the other nurse used a special feeder called a bread feeder, and it looks a bit like a turkey baster, except that it has a tube on the other end and a ball on the other end. And the goal is to shoot the milk to the back of the throat before it has a chance to come out the nose and the mouth. And because of the hole in the roof of the mouth, it comes out pretty quickly. And it was so sad because Heather was just gulping and gasping. She looked like she was drowning in formula. It was so sad to see this baby struggle so much just to eat. Well, the nurses cleaned her up, and they placed her in my arms, and they left me alone with her. And as I sat there and was looking at this baby, I was thinking, this is the baby that was inside of me for so long. This is the baby that I felt kicking and moving and hiccuping sometimes. At least that's what it felt like. And I fell in love with her. Mother instincts? Maybe. Well, after I was finished holding her, the nurses needed to take her back and take care of her because she was having some trouble breathing. So I went back to my room, and later that night, Heather's dad came. And they brought us dinner that is a little, congratulations, you had a baby girl. So there was a little pink plastic doll on her cake. So we started to eat our dinner, and there was a knock at the door, and in walked the white coats. There must have been a dozen doctors in that group. And the leader, Uncle George is what he goes by, cardiologist. He said, your baby has a heart murmur, and we don't know why. I was at home eating my dinner when I got the phone call, and they said, this baby has a murmur, and they told me about all the other problems she had, and honestly, I wondered why they were even calling. Because obviously this baby had so many problems, she probably wasn't going to live. Well, he said he wanted to go in and see what was going on, and they needed our permission to transfer her to Primary Children's Hospital, do a procedure. So we had to sign release forms, and he also had to sign a form giving them permission to do an autopsy. So while the doctor was gone, Terry and I just sat there and tried to process everything that was happening, which is pretty impossible. The doctor came back, and the first thing he said is, if I'd have known her heart looked that good, I wouldn't have done anything. And then he explained there's a little valve that usually closes when a baby is born. And the valve in Heather's heart hadn't closed yet, but usually they close by the time they're a year old. And then he left. Well, the next morning, all I wanted to do was go to Primary Children's Hospital. That's not a very clear picture in here, but it's the only picture I have of Heather in the intensive care unit in her dad's arms. And I was so happy to see her. She had to stay in a little isolette so that she could have some moist air to breathe and stay warm, but she was in there for 2 weeks. And I'm telling you, I didn't care what was wrong with her. I just wanted to take her home and be her mother. She was having a lot of trouble eating. So finally the doctor said, if you're willing to learn how to tube feed her, which is when you put a tube through the nose, down into the stomach, and then you just let gravity take the milk down, then I'll let you take her home. Well, I was really scared, but I really wanted to take her home, so I learned how to tube feed her. And before we left the hospital, a nurse came in and she gave me a lamb's nipple. It's a great big black nipple about this long. And she recommended putting it on the end of the breast feeder and trying to squeeze the ball and get the milk to shoot through a nipple so Heather could at least suck on something, even if it wasn't doing much. So that's what I did, and I'll tell you what, I spent a lot of time sitting in the rocking chair watching soap operas for the first 6 months of Heather's life, just feeding her all the time. So taking care of Heather, going to the doctors, and arranging surgeries began. Once at home, I had a nagging question. Why did this happen to me? So I was recommended a book called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And what I learned, it just does. It's just life. And I probably would never know why my baby was born with these problems. Well, when Heather was 1.5 years old, the geneticist called me up and he said, we think we know what she is. It's called post-axial acrofacial dysostosis. Basically, it's a really long word that includes a lot of the symptoms that affect Heather. Thank heavens, eventually they named it Miller syndrome after a Dr. Miller who reported the first case in medical history, in the medical literature. So it saved us some breath there. There were only 3 cases in the world documented when Heather was born, so they really had a hard time figuring out what syndrome she had. And then he went on to tell me that it's probably just a chain mutation. You know, the cells and the genes are dividing and they kind of take a wrong turn and they just keep going in that direction and it's just a complete fluke. And chances of it happening again are probably 1 in a million, probably less than that because it already happened. And your chance of having a reoccurrence is 0. Well, I was happy to hear that because I wanted another baby. I wanted a boy. And I found this article in a magazine and it said how to have a boy. Had all these funny little instructions, you know, so I followed the instructions and, well, I guess it worked. Of course, we all know you have a 50% chance. So I decided that when Heather turned 3, that would be a good time to have another baby because she'd be out of diapers and past the toddler stage. Well, when I was 7 months along, pregnant with Logan, we didn't do a lot of ultrasounds back then, but I really wanted an ultrasound because I wanted to be prepared when I went to the delivery room this time, even though I really didn't think anything would be wrong, and neither did anybody else. So when I was in getting my ultrasound, the technicians told me that I had a healthy girl. So I went along thinking I probably had a healthy girl, but I knew back then they could be wrong. Ultrasounds weren't as good back then in 1980 as they are now. Well, the time came finally to give birth to Logan. It was April Fool's Day. Can you believe that? Logan was born on April Fool's Day. The only people in the room were Terry, the nurse, the same doctor that delivered Heather, and me. And you could have heard a pin drop when we were waiting for that delivery. Well, the doctor pulled Logan out of me and said, "You have a boy." And of course, his arms were so obvious, it was just unbelievable, doesn't even begin to describe how truly unbelievable it really was. Well, I really wanted to nurse because I heard the weight just falls off when you nurse. So I said, "Well, does he have a cleft palate too?" I made this great big cape and I embroidered a sign on it that said, "Out to lunch." And I was going to wear it in public, because after all, nursing is supposed to be really convenient. Well, they told me Logan also had a cleft palate, so, okay, I guess I don't get to nurse. And of course, Heather was 3 years old, and she was developing very well. And yes, we had a lot of surgeries, but we were kind of getting used to the program, so it wasn't as scary when Logan was born, other than Logan also had breathing problems, so I didn't know if he was going to live or not, and I really wanted him to live. So finally, again, you'll learn to tube feed, we'll let you take him home. So he stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks and had the same eating and breathing problems, but I finally got to take him home. So there's Logan, 3 weeks old, approximately, at home. So I tube fed Logan for 6 full months because within a week, trying to feed him with the sniffle, he aspirated on the formula, and I had to rush him up to the hospital emergency. And of course, the doctor was out of town, and so all the doctors on call didn't know what to do with him, and he ended up with tubes in his head and all kinds of stuff. So I thought, that's it, I'm tube feeding him, I'm not taking any more chances. So I just basically, a lot of the time he had a tube taped to his face. And of course, Heather's new baby doll had a tube taped to its face too. She really liked her new baby doll. However, she liked her new little brother even better. So she was always there to help me take care of Logan. When Logan was born, we became the first family in the world to have a reoccurrence of Miller syndrome. Lucky us. So we still didn't have any answers as to why both of my children had Miller syndrome. This was something we had to accept. But we were happy that they were doing as well as they were. And we were handling things okay at that point, so we felt like we were a pretty strong family of 4. We focused on what we could do for Heather and Logan. And we were always looking for solutions. And of course, a lot of the solutions meant surgery. Straighten out their arms, close their cleft palate, a lot of other surgeries and procedures, give them an eyelid, because part of Miller syndrome is absence of the lower eyelid. Well, together Heather and Logan have had about 50 surgeries. And most of those surgeries, a lot of them were done when they were babies and toddlers, and then a few of them were done in elementary school, and a couple of them on each were done in adulthood. They're both in their 30s now. Terry and I loved our children, and we loved each other. However, the emotional stresses of Heather and Logan's surgeries and the financial difficulties that we were going through brought more hardships. We were both devastated when we lost our home, and I watched the man from the bank drive away our car. So Terry filed bankruptcy. I focused on the positive. I still had my family. I felt successful as a wife and a mother, and I still felt like I had purpose and fulfillment in my life. However, Terry wasn't handling the difficulties very well. All the financial problems, plus his emotions, caused him to resist our challenges. And when he got laid off from his job and was unemployed for a few months, I believe that's the straw that broke the camel's back for Terry. He responded to his stress by living in denial, and he ended up getting involved with another woman. This broke my heart. I was truly emotionally shattered from that. It took me a long time to recover from that. So we were divorced when Heather was in kindergarten and Logan was a toddler. I was left struggling as a single mother of 2 children with disabilities. I had a license in cosmetology, so I attempted to meet financial challenges by doing a few haircuts in my basement. And I also taught aerobics, both to stay healthy and to help make ends meet. But mostly, I lived on child support and government assistance. This brought a lot of relief, but it also brought a maze of paperwork and a lot more stress. I was having a difficult time juggling everything. As much as I tried, I wasn't quite up to it. I began to use food as a stress reliever, but I started to gain weight, so now I was creating another problem. I was resisting challenges, and I responded by developing the eating disorder, bulimia. My life situation had become so unmanageable, I was desperate for help. Bulimia and other addictions do not come crashing in all of a sudden. They sneak up on you. I started out feeling like I had my cake and ate it too, because I just ate whatever I wanted once every 2 weeks, and then I just purged. And I thought I had this great little tool that everybody probably wished they had. But what happens is pretty soon it's once a week, and then it's twice a week, and then it's every day, and then you have no control. have even any consciousness. And then, of course, you can't binge and let all that stay in, or you're really going to have a problem. So I was an absolute mess, not knowing who to ask for help. I ended up on a payphone in the lobby at Cottonwood Hospital, calling the eating disorder clinic on the 3rd floor of that same building. Well, when I told them where I was, they asked me to come upstairs and talk to the doctor. The doctor wanted to put me in the hospital. I said, no way. I've got 2 disabled children at home. There's no way that I can stay in the hospital. So they set me up with outpatient counseling, and they told me about their support group 1 night a week. And then they told me about Overeaters Anonymous, and there was a special meeting every Sunday for bulimics and anorexics. And I started going to the meetings faithfully. That is when I started learning about acceptance. I memorized the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This became the second pearl of wisdom, which became foundational in my life as I moved through my challenges. At that time, I'd lost the faith to believe in God in any traditional way. I learned to define God as a power greater than myself. So that meant one other person or a group of people that were in my life to help me became a power greater than me. And that's where I started. At first, I could only chant the Serenity Prayer when I was in emotional turmoil. I would just say it over and over and over and over. And it got to be calming because it gave my mind somewhere else to go besides just on how awful everything was. Later, I learned the 3 steps, or I like to call them the triple A's of acceptance. 1, awareness. Look at each challenge individually and decide which challenges can be changed, and identify the ones for which something can be done. 2, acceptance. There. Gain perspective by comparing the challenges and focus on those that are changeable. 3, action. Do something to alter the changeable situations. The first part of step 1, look at each challenge individually, sounds easy, but I was in denial. So I had to ask for help to do that. I couldn't even look at my challenge individually. They were just all bunched up in a great big mess. I found help in many forms: counseling, meditation, prayer, books, self-help books, lots of self-help books, friends, family, and support groups. Through this process, I determined which challenges couldn't be changed and which were changeable. This brought me to step 2, gain perspective by comparing the challenges and focus on those that are changeable. Well, my perspective shifted after I compared the challenges, and I learned to focus on the solutions to the changeable situations. Next came action. Do something to alter the changeable situation. Well, with my focus on the solutions now, instead of the problems, it was on the solutions, I was compelled to take action, to bring about the changes that I desired. I will use some of my personal examples to show the steps that I took to accept my challenges. At times during Heather and Logan's childhood, I felt tortured by my sadness. Sometimes I would just curl up in a little ball on the floor and sob. It was so painful, and I felt so helpless. I felt sad that they had all their disabilities and that they looked different. And I was so afraid for them, for the stares and the rejection that they would experience from other people. And I felt so helpless because there was nothing that I felt I could do. So I just desperately wanted them to look like everybody else, and be normal. Sometimes I cried till there were no more tears and I thought my heart would break. But then I realized that I couldn't change their physical appearance. And that I couldn't change how people reacted to them either. And suddenly, my perspective changed, and I realized there was no point focusing on these things anymore. That's when I felt the peace. Along with the peace came relief. I didn't have to think about these kinds of problems anymore. I started focusing on what I had to accept and what I could change. I created compartments in my mind, and I placed the things that I couldn't change in one compartment and the things that I could change in another compartment. I learned that sometimes there are situations that you can influence, like trying to influence another person to give up a bad habit or change a belief that just doesn't seem to be working for them. But I also learned, although I can influence them, I can't make them change. So that belongs in the compartment of things I cannot change. I focused on keeping my mind out of that compartment as much as possible. Except, sometimes I needed to visit those things, and I needed to grieve, and I needed to feel the loss, and I needed to cry. So I learned to really cry, just really get into it, feel that pain, let yourself mourn the loss. And then the pain would move through me, and it wouldn't get stuck inside me and make me do all those behaviors that were resisting how I felt. Just feel it, let it go through you, and it will go away, and you can move on to the solutions. Sometimes the only thing I could change about a situation was to make a choice to change my attitude and my thoughts about the situation. For example, Logan has a lung disease. He couldn't stop smoking, and most of the time, he didn't want to. It was causing me, or I was causing myself, an awful lot of anxiety and grief over the fact that Logan was smoking and making his lung disease worse, as far as I knew. But I couldn't make him stop smoking. And I also knew that if I kept showing disapproval every single time Logan was around me, it would damage our relationship. And it didn't help anyway. He just would avoid me. So I made the choice to change my thoughts about this problem. Logan said that smoking made him happier, and it gave him more enjoyment in life. So I chose to see that it would be better to have Logan live a shorter life with more happiness than a longer life that's unhappy. And that worked. I could quit thinking about it because I couldn't change it. So changing my view gave me peace, and it helped me accept other situations that I couldn't change as well. With the challenges that I decided I could change, I formed a vision in my mind of the results that I wanted to create. And along with that vision, that picture of what I wanted, there were always feelings of motivation, determination, hope. And I paid attention to those feelings, or you could call it a state of mind. And I paid attention so that I could remember what it felt like, so that the next day and the next day and all in the future, I could create this vision again, and I could produce that same state of mind, determination, motivation, hope, and I could start doing something about my challenges. Now, I have the strength to change my challenges. My first action was almost always to ask for help. When seeking medical specialists for physical or emotional needs, I asked friends and other doctors for referrals. When looking up information for government services or business help, way out of my league, I looked in the phone book under every single category that I could think of. And I picked up the phone and I called. Later, when computers got popular, I took a computer class and I learned how to use a computer so I could look for help on the computer. Well, truly, most of the time when I picked up that phone call, I had no idea what I was going to say. But I trusted that if I would just keep talking, that the person on the other end would, together we would figure out what direction would be the best for me to go. Even if it was the wrong direction, the next person can help me as well. The key to doing that is you have to be willing to look stupid sometimes. You really do. You have to just give it up. You don't know what you're going to say, so just do it, or you're not going to find out anything. So that's what I did. I found help getting Heather and Logan an education. Heather has a degree in psychology. Logan has a degree in graphic design. I found them help to look at employment possibilities. I found Logan help to start his own business called Logan Madsen Fine Art, and he can work as a self-employed artist. I found them help to live independently in their own apartments. Whatever I thought of doing, I did. I learned that challenges will always keep coming. This is the nature of life. I quit thinking that as soon as I handled this challenge, I could rest and there won't be any more. Wrong. There's always another challenge. So I started to appreciate the breaks in between the challenges. And that I didn't take them for granted anymore. That's when I built up my strength. I enjoyed that moment because I knew it wasn't going to stick around forever. A new challenge came for me approximately 7 years ago. Heather was diagnosed with autism. This explains so many mysteries. For example, as a child, Heather didn't seem to notice people staring at her. It was like she lived in a little protective bubble. It was really interesting. And of course, it made it easier for me and less painful for me because she wasn't hurt by all those stares and self-consciousness. She was happy with her routines. Go to school, come home, do her homework in front of the TV, eating her M&Ms. She just did the same routine, followed all the rules, never got in trouble. She was perfectly happy with all that. And of course, when a surgery came, she just did the process, went through what she had to do. Well, when Heather was 18, she discovered chat rooms on the internet. I was always worried that one day her bubble would burst. Her new reality, that people had thoughts and feelings about other people, punctured her bubble. She became more self-conscious about how she looked and how looking different was going to affect her entire future. And it didn't help that at 18, she had major craniofacial surgery that literally completely changed what her face looks like. So that really added to the difficult situation, and she went into some depression. When she hit the right card here, later she had trouble finding a job because in the workplace you have noise and lights and people and lots of things that she couldn't do with short arms and less mobility and lung disease and no energy, and it was just completely all overwhelming for her, especially with autism, which we didn't know she had, to help her out in that arena. Well, it was really hard for me to accept this new reality. I'd already accepted they have Miller syndrome and lung disease, and we don't know why, and all these other challenges, and now I had to accept that Heather had autism. I'd always envisioned Heather and Logan getting a degree, getting a good solid job, like a government job in an office with benefits and a regular paycheck. So suddenly I had to get used to this new idea that Heather may never work. Just as we were getting used to our new reality with Heather's autism, which had taken about a year and a half or so, Logan was diagnosed with a different form of autism. It was having a lot of psychological difficulties, but he was so different from Heather. We were shocked at this diagnosis. Logan noticed everything about social and people and how they moved and how they acted, and so his childhood was a lot more difficult because he did notice the stares and he hated looking different, and it was quite a struggle. Well, autism was a new challenge for me to accept, and it was also a new challenge for me to help Heather and Logan accept. Whole new reality. This took some time, but we found good medical help and we educated ourselves about autism. We started implementing the skills that we learned, and we focused on what we could do that would help our lives better. Just as I felt things were starting to go along a little bit more smoothly, the unthinkable happened. 2.5 years ago, I came face to face with a scary diagnosis concerning my own health. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I experienced a similar reaction like when Heather was born. Disbelief. This isn't happening. No way. Denial. I'll never forget the doctor's words. It was a Friday afternoon in July 2010. I was cutting a customer's hair that happened to be a nurse when the doctor called. He said, "We got the results of your brain MRI. Your suspicions are correct. It's MS." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't really think I would have something serious like MS. I mean, I had some numbness in my toes and it was creeping up my feet and up into my calf. And, you know, a neurologist said circulation disorder and tarsal tunnel. That's like carpal tunnel, only it's with your feet. That made perfect sense. I'm on my feet a lot. I hike, I ski, I cut hair, I teach aerobics. I kind of like that diagnosis a lot better. But that was the only disease that came to my mind when he said, if we don't find a result, when we do muscle testing and nerve testing and blood work, we'll do a brain MRI and look for other things. And I said, you mean like MS? Because I just happened to have a friend who had MS. That's the only reason it came to my mind. I didn't even know that much about it. Well, another mountain to climb. This diagnosis started another difficult journey to acceptance for me. I took one step at a time. Acceptance doesn't happen overnight. Heather helped me because she loves research, and I really don't. I just look long enough to find what I need and I'm done. It's one thing nice about someone with autism, at least the form of high-functioning autism that Heather has. If they're interested in a topic, they become specialists about it, and they can answer any questions that you have about it. Well, Heather helped me out a lot. She bought me the book, MS for Dummies. And then she went through the book and she read the whole thing, and she highlighted only the parts that she knew I would want to know about right now. So it really helped me a lot, and I got some answers. Well, with my success in accepting and handling the difficult challenges that I faced before, I've been able to accept this new challenge, one step at a time. I started right away on a daily injection called Copaxone. And the way it works, it's like a decoy. So instead of your immune system attacking the myelin, which is the lining around your nerves, it's attracted to this protein that's in Copaxone. It doesn't work on everyone. I've been very, very, very fortunate. It works very well. So I have a little auto injector. I don't even have to, I just push a button. Gives me an injection every day. And I'm so grateful for it that sometimes it's even hard to get frustrated, but I have to do it again. But I'm really grateful it's working, and not only did it stop MS from progressing in me, but it also helped make a lot of the symptoms better. I can actually feel the carpet under my feet now. I can feel the bottom of my shoes when I wiggle my toes. My feet were getting so numb, I just didn't really, you could take a key down my foot and I wouldn't feel it. Well, now I'll jump through the ceiling, just like most people will. So one day at a time, I just work to keep my stress low and not get over fatigue. And I tell people the best way to explain my MS, and I think it's this way with everyone no matter what their symptoms are, is fatigue, because everything a person with MS does takes more work. So unlike a hairdryer, you turn it on, it goes full blast, it's overheated, turns off, you gotta wait for it to cool down. But then it'll turn back on full blast. So what I learned to do is rest, at least twice a day, 20 minutes a day. But the only way that I could really rest was to cut off I cover my eyes, I make sure I'm comfortable laying down, by the way. Sitting there, in meditation, I gotta be comfortable, I need my body comfortable. I wish I could fall asleep, but usually I can't because I'm not that tired. So what I learned to do is follow some of the little rules, which are a lot of little games you play with your mind. Focus on your breathing, focus on your heart rate, pretend like there's a shiny white light that's covering your body and you're inside healing. All these different things to try and keep your mind busy, basically. So it's not thinking about all your problems or getting you all stressed out. Well, I have a very active mind, so that isn't all that easy to do, but I'm getting better at it after 2.5 years. Well, in conclusion, so I talked about the phrase, what you resist will persist, and what I understand this to mean. And I have, through my personal history, shown examples of situations where I resisted and they did in fact persist, and even expanded into more challenges. I presented to you the Serenity Prayer. And I talked about the 3 steps that I use to accept life's challenges: awareness, acceptance, and action. It's through acceptance that I gain strength and peace. This was a Tribune article that was in the Tribune on March 2010. So we lived 34 answers, not knowing why Heather and Logan had Miller syndrome or why they had a lung disease that was not associated with Miller syndrome. So in 2009, the scientists collected enough of our blood that they could go study and sequence our genome. And in March 2010, they announced they found the gene that causes Miller syndrome. And then they also found the gene that causes their lung disease, and we even have a name for it now. It's called Primary Ciliary Dyskinesia, or PCD. The cilii are the little moving hairs that bring all of the particles out of your lungs so you don't get pneumonia, and your nose and your tear ducts. They're in your body. And Heather and Logan's cilii don't work, and if they do work, they're really lazy and they move really slow. So that's what PCD is, and it's not all that common either. So these genes are what you call recessive. And what that means is mom and dad both have a copy of the gene. So when they have offspring, then your child has a 25% chance of getting the gene from mom and the gene from dad and having the disease. Now, both of those diseases are a recessive gene. The chances of Heather and Logan both getting both of those diseases is 1 in 10 billion. And there's only 7 billion people on the planet. Kind of strange. When I'm telling this story, I feel like I'm just telling you about a movie or something, figures, but I actually have a hard time believing it too. So, now we're happy to know that other families can now get answers to their unanswered questions, and participating with scientists has helped us make a positive difference in so many lives around the world. And making a positive difference in your life and in other people's lives makes every day easier for us. Makes our challenges a little bit easier because we know we're helping someone. This is the cover of the book that I wrote and published about a year ago, called 8 Fingers and 8 Toes, Accepting Life's Challenges. And I can't tell you how excited I was when Logan came up with the idea for the cover. Mom, you hold a rope, Heather and I will hold on to the bottom of the rope, which pretty much represents our life. And then with his graphic design skills, he designed the cover. So that concludes my presentation.